So I grew up outside Toronto, but when I finished at Lakehead, I moved right to the Yukon. And I moved into the forest, into a wall tent, a canvas tent, where I had no electricity or running water, and I started to work with the government to do wilderness trips for youth at risk and young offenders. And I loved the Yukon, it was amazing, but I started to want to do something different, and I really wanted to work in humanitarian aid. So after a few years, I went back to school, I became a nurse. I returned to the Yukon, and I worked for a few years as a nurse in the Yukon, trying to get as much experience as I possibly could. So MSF is known as Doctors Without Borders in Canada, Médecins Sans Frontières. It's a medical humanitarian aid organization that works in more than 66 countries around the world, responding to populations in need, whether it's because of conflict, displacement, outbreak, neglected illnesses. And it was an organization I had wanted to work with for a long time. I really appreciated their strong stand on things. I appreciated their témoignage, which is the act of bearing witness or the act of speaking out. I appreciated that they spoke out when they knew that things were not right. I mean, every single assignment is memorable for its own reason. In May 2018, I went to an Ebola outbreak in Eastern Congo, and I was the project manager for the project that used the experimental Ebola vaccine for the very first time at the beginning of an outbreak. We set up a hospital in Mosul, in East Mosul, while the war was going on, and we saved so many lives. And I spent a lot of time in South Sudan. And South Sudan for me is this amazing place with, we have this really incredible project called AGOC, which is a big hospital that's providing healthcare in an area where if we didn't exist, it would be a lot of those people wouldn't have any access to healthcare. In February 2019, one of the Ebola treatment centers, two of the Ebola treatment centers that MSF managed in North Kivu in Congo were attacked. They were attacked very violently. One was on February 24th, burned to the ground at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then the bigger one, which was 96 beds, was attacked at 6 p.m. In a very violent way. Patients fled, staff fled. It was horrible. It was destroyed. And that was extremely challenging because we had to look at why did we get attacked, and we never found out who attacked us, but we could have a lot of ideas about why we were attacked. In MSF, we're a team. I don't think I have achieved anything in MSF individually. I think of in South Sudan, there was one year in South Sudan, there was a huge amount of malaria. So the next year, we had to think of something to do to save lives. And so we set up this great malaria project. And it was like motorcycle superheroes. We had about 8 guys on motorcycles, and they just spent their weeks distributing drugs to these community health workers. And it was, this sounds like a little project, but it was amazing. I mean, we treated hundreds of thousands of people. Health centers were no longer overwhelmed. The hospital that we were managing was no longer overwhelmed. And I just think of how many people's lives we saved and how communities could access care within their own community, no matter how remote it was. To me, this was amazing. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's really intense. You have to be extremely cautious. You have to live with very tight rules about where you can go and what you can do. It's very different rules than what you would usually do in your regular life. But when I'm working with MSF, I never question if I should be there. I always see the need, and I'm always really glad that I'm there. I'm really happy with what we're doing. There's a lot of joy in my life, even if I live in really extreme situations. Every year, I go home to the Yukon, so my tent became a chalet about 6 years ago. And a chalet is an elegant cross between a chalet and a shed. And it still has no electricity or running water, but it's very special to me. And I always know I can go home. And very close to my home is a very good friend of mine and her 5 children. And every year I go home and we do a canoe trip in the Yukon in June. And this brings me a lot of joy. But also, I mean, there's a lot of joy in the projects that we do. And while we work really hard, we also laugh really hard. There's a really amazing community within MSF. You get very close to the people that you work with.